Before we jump into today's episode, let's hear from today's sponsor. Honest stories of pregnancy, parenthood, and loss are too often left unshared. We are here to tell the real stories. Join mom, actress, and advocate Tatiana Ali to hear real stories about the joys and humor of parenting to the heartbreak and loneliness of miscarriage and loss in a new podcast from the March of Dimes. Each episode features a parent's honest story about the realities of starting a family. It only takes hearing one story like your own to know you are not alone. To join the conversation, go to unspokenstories.org and marchofdimes.org. Let's get on to today's show. You're listening to the Sisters in Loss podcast, a faith-based grief and loss podcast for Black women, where you will hear stories of miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility to learn there is a testimony in tragedy. You will learn how to heal, gain clarity, find hope and peace, and turn your pain into your purpose after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee. Thank you, Chappy, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me on the podcast.
I would like for you to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I'm Chappy. I was diagnosed with PCOS at 17, and I'm currently working with autistic children in the Board of Ed.
Take us all the way back on your journey to motherhood. You know, talk to us more about what they told you after they actually diagnosed you with PCOS at 17.
So when I was diagnosed, I was like fake diagnosed. They just thought I was always an overweight kid. So they blamed a lot of things on me being overweight. So when I was 17, I got my first period and then it stopped coming. And then every month I thought I was pregnant because it literally stopped coming every month. So eventually I went to a doctor, they diagnosed me, and she kind of was telling me, like, to reassure me, like, you're going to have a very hard time getting pregnant if you ever even get pregnant, because you don't really ovulate. When you have PCOS, ovulation is very hard. So I went really my whole life thinking that I was never going to have kids, and I kind of accepted that was going to be the fun aunt. So I ended up losing a lot of weight before my 30th birthday because I was borderline diabetic, and they started giving me insulin, and I didn't want insulin. So I lost 110 pounds. And then 2 years later...
Congratulations to you on that one. We got to pause and give you a round of applause for that. 110 pounds is no easy feat. My goodness. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's quite the journey, I tell you. But it was nice to finally get a period every month. I'll tell you that much. People who get their period once a month don't appreciate it when I tell them that, like, I really enjoyed getting my period every month for 2 years. So I lost the weight, and then 2 years later, I was just going to the doctor for a regular checkup. I didn't even think I was pregnant. My period was late, but I thought I had gained a little bit of weight, and I thought I was back to just not getting periods. So she's like, "You're pregnant." And I was like, "Oh, it's a lie." You need to test me again because I can't have kids, And it never even occurred to me that, once I lost the weight, I might be able to get pregnant. I just thought, I had PCOS. That was it. There go babies. There was no future of me having babies. So she's like, "Well, you're pregnant." I was like, "Well, let's do it again," because they told me I couldn't have kids. And we did like 4 tests in the office. They all said I was pregnant. I was excited, but I was kind of a little bummed because I had just came back from a vacation, and that was around the time when Zika was a big deal. So my journey started with me thinking I had Zika and the baby had Zika. So I had to go through a lot of up and downs to get tested for Zika while I was pregnant. So I couldn't enjoy my pregnancy probably until like a month after I found out I was pregnant. So once I got tested for Zika and it was negative, I was kind of excited about the pregnancy. I was all ready to be a mom and, the whole 9 yards, having my miracle baby, I called it. When I was 20 weeks, they were doing the anatomy ultrasound, where they do the toes, they do the fingers, they do all of that, the long ultrasound, I call it. And the technician was just making me nervous. It's like she kept looking and looking and looking, and it didn't feel like a peaceful place, So as we're sitting there, me and my son's father, I was getting all worked up in my mind because I was like, oh my God, the baby has 2 heads, like thinking all the worst things that could possibly be. So she calls somebody else in the room, and they're looking closer, and then more people come to the room, but they're not saying anything to me. They're just talking like in doctor terms to each other about whatever she sees on the ultrasound. So I try to get up to talk to the lady, and I pass out. In between me passing out, not only did I pass out, but I puked and I peed on myself. So they had to admit me into the hospital that day. And when I woke up, basically they thought he just had a VSD, which is like a hole in the heart. So that was like January 20th of 2017, actually. So they kept saying, oh, it's just a hole in the heart. A lot of times babies have hole in the hearts and it closes up by the time the baby was born. You know, they were trying to reassure me, I think, mostly because my blood pressure was so high and they wanted to discharge me, and they couldn't discharge me with my blood pressure being so high. The day the doctor came in and he was like, well, we want you to go get an echocardiogram and we'd like you to do it as soon as possible. So the way they were rushing me to do the echo, I kind of felt like something else was going on, but they didn't really want to tell me because they didn't want to get me all worked up. So 3 days later, I go to get this echo and I pass out again. And I was passing out more because I had gestational diabetes, they thought. But basically, if I didn't eat before I went to echo, I was passing out because it was such a long process. It was usually 2 hours, 3 hours of them trying to see the baby's heart through you. So it's a long process. So he diagnosed the fetus at that time with a lot of stuff. So he had VSDs, multiple VSDs. That's multiple holes in the heart. He had they call something called DORV. Then he had interrupted aortic arch. He had ASDs. All I remember the doctor saying is like, the baby's going to need surgery if he even makes it outside the womb. As a first-time mom, even though I was an adult in my 30s, it was still traumatic to hear such a thing. So I went home devastated, and at that point, I was probably like 21 weeks. So they were telling me, like, you can abort if you really want to, if you think it's too much for you. But the case is he's going to need surgery when he's born, like as soon as he's born. And then they gave me all this paperwork to walk around with because I lived like an hour from the hospital. So they gave me paperwork saying like the fetus is sick and he needs medicine when he's born if I was to deliver anywhere else. And that's kind of where the drama of this life started with CHD. So congenital heart disease, I knew nothing about at this time. I just knew I was having a baby with heart problems and my baby was going to need surgery when he was born. And I had to go home and think if this was a life that I really wanted for the both of us. And me and my family thought it through, and it was kind of like, we're just going to see what happens because we didn't really want to jump the gun. I was like, hopefully they're wrong. In my mind, I just believed that they were wrong. And when the baby was born, he was going to be born perfectly, I think. So in my mind, like I was devastated a lot, but I think I believed for a long time that they were wrong. So after that, I went to the doctor literally every 2 weeks to check the baby's heart and to check on me every 2 weeks until I gave birth. So let's fast forward to the birth. My water broke on a Friday at 5 p.m. And they had told me originally, even in my appointments, that whenever I wanted an epidural, they'll give me the epidural because they didn't want to put the baby through any stress. So my water broke at 5 p.m. I got my first contraction at like 9:30, and it wasn't even a big contraction, but I was like, oh, give me the epidural now. So they gave me the epidural at probably 10 p.m., and that's kind of where my dilation stopped. 10 p.m. Friday night, I got the epidural, and I stopped dilating. They had to do an emergency C-section Sunday morning, like at midnight, to get him out because he was having, his heart rate was declining. So they rushed me into the OR. They prepped me. They told me that you're not going to see the baby until probably after I get out of recovery. That was what they promised me. So we did the C-section, and the nurse was nice enough to show me the baby real quick. Once I got into recovery, they rolled me into they have a room before the babies go into NICUs for me to see the baby in person, and then kind of to go into my room. So Messiah had his first surgery. So he was born April 30th, 2017 at 1:47 in the morning. And he had his first surgery May 5th. So he had it at day 5. He had a surgery called the Norwood. The surgeon was very pleased with the result. He was impressed that it went so well because he had a really, really low percentage of living through that surgery. So I think the percentage rate was like 5% maybe of him living through the surgery at 5 days old. He lived through the surgery, thank God. And he spent 66 days in the NICU recovering from that surgery because while he was having that surgery, his vocal cords got damaged and his left diaphragm got damaged as well. And he was having a hard time breathing on his own. So he spent a long time in the hospital on CPAP. So most of our stay was because we couldn't get him off of CPAP. So the heart surgery was a success. That part was fine. It was his breathing. after that, instead of us going straight home, we ended up going to rehab to kind of work on his breathing, work on his feeding, because he also wasn't feeding through the mouth. And we spent 21 days in rehab, which wasn't so bad. They did a lot of therapy with him to get him stronger. That's going to help him with his breathing. And then after that, we kind of went home and we kind of went into I just went into regular mom mode. I mean, he was a special kid because he had a G tube. And at that time he had a NG tube. That's the one that goes down the nose. And, in rehab, they trained me on how to use it. And he also went home on oxygen. So it was a really, really, I think rehab was more of a training process for me, like to learn how to deal with Messiah and all his cares on my own. When we left rehab, we did get nursing. So for the first month home from rehab, I had a nurse every day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. who was really, really great. She went with me to doctor's appointments. She was my hands. And if I needed a nap, she let me take a nap. And things started being really, really well. It was summertime, of course, so he wasn't getting sick. So that's the perks of the summer. And by November, we suggested that he gets the G tube because he wasn't progressing on eating through his mouth. And he was pulling out the NG tube literally every day. I was replacing it daily to the point that I was a professional at it. I could put it in the moving car. I just wanted him to have a free face because he was finally off of oxygen by this time. And the only thing that was on his face was the NG tube. And he hated it. So we did the G tube in November. And then December, he got really sick with rhinovirus. And that caused him to be 3 days in the hospital for that virus. And we had to start looking forward to his second stage surgery. And that ended up being February 26th of 2018. So he was about 10 months at this time when I took him into the hospital to get the second stage surgery. So we were discussing if we should just go from the Norwood to the Glen, or would he be able to do the hybrid surgery and go from the Norwood to the Rastelli. So the Rastelli would have given him complete function of his heart, which would have made him a two-ventricle kid. And it made more sense for him to do the Rastelli instead of doing the Glen at that time. Now I have different opinions, but that's just now. So we did the Rastelli on the 26th of February, and we thought all was well. I thought we were hitting recovery, and we weren't. So by March 1st, he had to go back into the OR because the Rastelli is basically patches over the holes in his heart to make the heart function like it didn't have holes. And what was happening with Messiah was the patches that they were putting on kept not ripping off like that, but it kept peeling off, and they had to keep going in to repatch it. So he got repatched on the 1st of March. He got repatched on the 15th of March. And then on the 21st of March, he almost coated. And that's when they discovered that the patches are opening again. So March 28th, they added PA bands. PA bands is basically bands they add on the pulmonary arteries to control the blood flow. When they added the bands, we thought all was well, and we thought he was getting better. So April 19th, which was 45 days of us living in the hospital, we were discharged. I'm lying. It was April 12th. We were discharged, and we were back in the hospital by April 19th. He came home for 6 days, and he was very fussy. He wasn't himself. I thought it was teething. He was just miserable. When we got readmitted on April 19th, he was really sick at that time. But they thought it was something called culture negative sepsis. It usually happens in the hospital, so we assumed that he caught it before he left the hospital. He had a spinal tap done. Everything had came back negative, but they still treated him like it was sepsis. So that's April 20th. He started getting better. Maybe by the 28th of April, they did an echo. And on the echo, they seen some lumps in his chest, in his heart, that later on was determined to be aneurysms. So April 29th, the day before his first birthday, his cardiologist told me that he has aneurysms in his heart, and it might be inoperable at that time. As devastating as that day was, I still wanted him to kind of have a good first birthday. So on April 30th, we had a little party for him in the hospital. I didn't tell anybody until after the party what was going on with Messiah, even though he was miserable for the last week or so before that, just crying and fussing. We couldn't get him comfortable in the hospital, and we couldn't get him mad because we didn't want the aneurysms to pop. So they were sending his scans over to the hospital for a second opinion, because the thing with aneurysms is you don't know if they're going to pop. And if they do pop, that's kind of it. So that's April 30th. He had his surgery for his aneurysms because they were growing too fast. May 15th or 16th. I think it's the 16th. I should have had my dates right. He had surgery for the aneurysms. And at that surgery is when they decided to take him from the Rustelli back to the Glen. And he did the Glen on that day. And he came back from that surgery basically in heart failure. So when a kid gets in heart failure, that's when you start talking to the transplant team. It's not always for transplant. It's more for medicines to help the heart function better to hopefully get the heart back on track. So 2 weeks after that surgery, we started talking to a heart transplant about options of medicine options that they can add on. And before we jump to transplant, I was like, let's give him 30 days to recover. He's been through a lot. This is his 5th surgery this year. I would be angry too. My heart would need some time to regroup. So every time they try to talk to me about transplant in June, I kind of was like, let's give him more time. Let's give him more time. But by the end of June, I had to kind of face reality that the heart was not going to get better. We were throwing these drugs at the heart and the heart wasn't taking the drugs. So the problem with his heart was the function of the way it squeezed wasn't squeezing well. We joined the transplant list. We knew the transplant would be hard, tricky, especially because he had so many surgeries in a short period of time. So even after he went in for every surgery, we always heard the same thing about the scar tissue and how much bleeding happens because of the scar tissue. So it's like you keep cutting into the same wound over and over. It's really bad scar tissue. And then the scar tissue is trying to heal, and then you're cutting right back into it again. So let's keep in mind, the 4 surgeries he had all of them were heart surgeries, but only one of them, they didn't do him with bypass. The other ones were all on bypass. So after we decided to sign up for heart transplant, we waited 49 days, and then he got his heart. And usually people are very, very excited about the heart coming, but I knew, I don't know if I call it a mother's intuition or what, but when they told me his heart was ready and he was getting a heart the next day, I didn't feel excited at all. I kind of felt like, let me go back. I'm sorry. So by June and July, he was up and Messiah was up out of the bed, actually like a toddler and having a good time. And I was enjoying my son, for the first time in a long time, I was able to enjoy him and take him outside and just be a mom with a kid, even though we had 400 wires attached to us. So I was able to enjoy him in a way that I was dying to enjoy him. So just to know he was going to go back into the OR and have to be sick again and recover from that, I was mentally not ready for that. So he had his transplant August 28th. He went to the OR August 28th at 8 a.m. He didn't come back out from the OR until almost 1 a.m. So I knew something was wrong, and I believe in my heart of hearts that they did extraordinary measures to bring back a body, because Messiah didn't come back. I definitely got his body back, but I didn't get him back. And he came back from transplant a mess. So the issue they had in the OR was they couldn't get him to stop bleeding. So he was bleeding out, but they were pumping him full back of blood, and he kept bleeding out with the blood. So when he came back up at 1 a.m., he was still bleeding out. And it was literally every nurse on the floor in that room trying to get my son situated and to get Messiah in a comfortable place. And it was just a horror to watch. 2 days after transplant, they determined that he was having seizures. And then when we did a CAT scan of his head, it was determined that he had a blood clot in his brain and he had a stroke and he was still having seizures. And then they had a meeting with me and they told me that he may be brain damaged, but they couldn't confirm or tell me how severe it would be. And for me not to get my hopes up really too high, because even if he gets better, he still has this neuro issue on the table now. So Messiah went into the hospital in February with his heart problems. And by August, he had brain problems. He had kidney problems. He had lung problems. He had liver issues that we didn't know about. And it just for 49 days after the transplant, because he died 49 days after transplant, I kind of watched hoping for a miracle and praying for a miracle. And we thought we were getting this miracle. And on October 15th, we planned all this stuff to get him extubated, get him ready to really, really start his healing process. And we extubated him October 16th in the morning at 12 o'clock. And he was dead by 11:30 p.m. October 16th. And what I will say is I was at the point where I was like tired of making decisions. And I feel like this decision he made for himself. And I found a little peace because he did look peaceful when he passed away, even though it was a very traumatic day and night of them doing compressions and me watching compressions and me begging them to fix it and me begging them to fix him and bring him back and them trying to convince me there's nothing more they can do. The peacefulness in him, he's been through so much. It was just like happiness to see him at peace finally, even though I knew it was going to be torture for me. So that's kind of the gist of our journey through this heart transplant and having congenital heart disease and us trying to fight through it and to get here where I'm a bereaved mother.
So much for sharing that in detail and just going through and explaining all the details about it for the listeners. So for the,
Today's podcast episode is sponsored by the March of Dimes. There is no perfect pregnancy, birth, or parent, and yet we rarely hear the real stories. It's time we speak up. Mom, actress, and advocate Tatiana Ali hosts Unspoken Stories, a new podcast from March of Dimes featuring real stories from the joys of parenthood to what happens when things don't go according to plan. You can listen to Unspoken Stories for free wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting unspokenstories.org. We see a lot of perfect images of pregnancy, birth, and parenting, but more and more people are standing up to tell their real stories. In this podcast, you will hear some of those real stories from the joy of parenting and the complexities of dealing with illness with actress and mom Jamie Lynn Sigler, a mom coping with loss and raising two toddlers, to the realities of parenting a baby born prematurely. These brave moms and dads have the courage to speak up and share their laughter, tears, and triumphs so that no one has to feel alone in their experiences. Sisters in Loss, I hope that you will join this important conversation, whether you're a parent or you're considering becoming one. Subscribe to Unspoken Stories for free wherever you get your podcast and learn more by visiting unspokenstories.org. That's unspokenstories.org.
Listeners, so for the time that you spent in the hospital, really tell us how you grieve, because you spent so much time really on a defensive, like you were really literally fighting for your son. So really tell us, how did you grieve through that process? Because I know, you mentioned as you were talking that, you had a few months with him during the summer where he was just, you could see the bubbly toddler that you've been wanting to play with that whole time. But I know because I have a child with special needs. So I know the back and forth you have to go through in the hospital just to advocate for your son. So really tell us about how you process that whole thing.
What I will say is that the hospital and the staff and everybody really respected my opinions and really allowed me to be a part of the team. And I literally lived there, so I didn't go home at all. I woke up there, I went to sleep there every single day for 8 months. You kind of build a relationship with everybody and they kind of build their trust into you. So usually they don't take kids outside from the PICU floor. So he was in intensive care and I begged them every day while he was getting better. Like, we need to go outside. He needs to see sunlight. And I kind of I told him, like, one day you're going to just see me rolling down the hall screaming because I want to go outside, take us outside. And I thank them for that always, because we did get a lot of outside time and a little bit of normalcy, if you call it. How did I survive? I think I survived living in the hospital. I had a really good support team. My mom and my friends and my sisters, they would pop by just to keep me a little sane or to drop off. I'm not going to say, but I had wine sometime in the hospital to drop off or whatever it is that some regular conversations to get your mind off of just living in the hospital and being always in doctor and nurse mode 24/7. And I also think as a mother, you do what needs to be done for your kids. So I advocate for him, but I also didn't have to advocate a lot because we were in such good hands where if I said something, they believed what I said or they took it seriously. I didn't have to plead my case for a lot of things. I didn't feel like I wasn't in good hands where I'm continuously defending a situation. Like, I was full of a team of people who really cared about Messiah, and he grew on them just like how they grew on me. And we became like a big family in the PICU where if I complained about something or I think something was off, they rushed in and they believed what I was saying. I didn't have to convince people that I was telling the truth or convince people to listen to me. I think that's also what kept me sane, was that if I said he was blue, he was really blue. You know, if I said this is off, it was really like he was off. And I think you need a good support system to get through it. And you need a good partnership with the people who was caring for your kids, caring for your child at the time. And I had both of those two things. Also, I had a lot of junk food and a lot of wine to keep me going. It was quite the experience, but I also feel like he was never alone during the journey. And I'm grateful to say that I can say that. Like, it was no part of the journey where he was alone or abandoned or felt like he was alone. I was there cheering him on or being whatever he needed me to be. I mean, because when he was awake and playing, it was days that he didn't sleep at all. And I was up 24/7 trying to entertain a toddler, asking them to give me an IV because whatever they're giving him in his IV is making him too energized that I can't keep up. So, I think when you're a parent, you kind of just do what you have to do. And I had something to do, and that's to keep my son engaged, also keep him learning because I didn't want him to fall too behind. And I just played with him and had a good time with him. I'm not even gonna, you know. And then when the serious stuff came, like making decisions on all these surgeries or what I think he has to go to OR or he has to go get a CAT scan or he needs an MRI. I mean, that's when it got kind of complicated. I think it was after transplant when everything kind of got a little overwhelming because he had so much going on. You know, it was so overwhelming that I had to take notes when we were having rounds in the morning because they were discussing all these different parts of his body when before it was just about his heart, you know, or his lungs. Now it was everything is on the table. I have to focus on everything. I have to speak to all these doctors. I have to be a part of all these different doctors coming in the room. And I took a lot of notes and I have to be on top of what's going on. And I think the best thing you can do is know what's going on with your kid. You know, today they did this. I had notes. Today we did this. Tomorrow we did that. I have 8 months of notes in my phone about what medicines he was on, what medicine they took off, how was his attitude, what was going on, what doctors visit. You know, I was a little anal in that way. But
I think that everything you just said, I mean, I can attest to it. So I definitely know how it is dealing with the hospital care. But I'm so happy that they were so supportive and that your voice was heard. And then every time that you said something, they were listening because in many folks, that's not the case. So I'm so happy that that you were supported during that time. So after he passed away, what were the next steps did you all take? Did you all hold a memorial service for him? And tell us about that process.
Before we go to the memorial process, after he passed away, you know, they let us keep him as long as I wanted to keep him. So I got my family up to come visit before they took him to the morgue, I guess. So we had him for about 6-7 hours. They let me bathe him. They let me dress him. They let me take feet molds and footprints and handprints, all types of stuff, which you don't really think of. I never even thought of it. So thank God the nurse thought of all this stuff because now it's like treasures that you can never do them over. You know, these are treasures now. And then so after he passed away, I've never had to do a funeral before. So I really didn't know what to do. I kind of just went into a funeral home maybe like 2 days later and I told the guy, I said, I don't know what to do. My son passed away. I need to make a funeral arrangements and I don't know how to start the funeral arrangements. I don't know where to start the funeral arrangements, but I know I need to do it. And he kind of course, they do most of the work, the funeral home. So he just gave us prices and he's like, you can shop around. And I knew I wasn't shopping around because I didn't have the energy to say this to another person. And we got the calculation of the figures and we had to find a graveyard, even though I knew I should have cremated him. But I did bury him, and he did pick the location that he wanted to be buried in, of course, because he's very bossy. Because originally I was going to buy 2 plots, one for me later on when I passed away to be next to my son. But when we went to the graveyard and the GPS stopped us in the middle of the graveyard, not even by the office. It was by a plot called Angel's Rest where they buried the children. And I never really considered to bury him with children. But when we when the GPS stopped us in the middle of the cemetery, I kind of felt like this is kind of where he wants to be, around children. He spent his whole life around a bunch of adults trying to figure him out. He should be buried with children. So I ended up burying him on Angel's Rest with the children. And I had a beautiful celebration of life for him on October 28th. We did a really big funeral. He had a big funeral. I mean, I didn't plan it. I didn't think it was going to be this big. I really estimated in my mind 100 people. And we had about maybe 250, 300 people there, which is big for a 17-month-old funeral who couldn't talk. Then we did the graveyard where we let go some doves, some balloons, and then we had a repast. And a lot of it is a blur. You know, I just know I planned all this stuff, and I decorated the repast kind of the same way I decorated the baby shower. I did everything as a celebration because I didn't want it to be like a sad, even though it was a sad moment, I didn't want people to come in and feel sad. So it was kind of like a party. We did a lot of singing. We had praise dancers, well, a praise dancer. So it was kind of a joyous experience because he was really a happy kid. You know, as sick as he was, he never knew he was sick. He was joyful. He was full of life. He was full of laughter. The kid makes you smile. The kid makes you want to talk to him. Okay. So I didn't want it to be a funeral where you feel so heavy and sad. I kind of wanted you to understand when you are in a sad place, but also feel the life that he brought to all of us. And that's kind of how I planned the funeral, to make it a joyous occasion because he was joy.
So tell us about now. You know, you had the funeral up until like now. How have you started the grieving and healing process? And, you know, what steps have you taken to work on yourself as you grieve?
I think the first big step I took was going back to therapy. I had Messiah passed away on a Tuesday and I was in therapy by Thursday. So my mentality was I may not need it, but if I do, I'd rather be in it. So I joined therapy very, very early. And I'm still in therapy once a week now. That was the first thing I did. And then I think in the beginning, I was kind of trying to have control over my grief. Like, oh, this the days I will grieve. This the days I'll try to be a regular person. And it wasn't until probably January where I realized that I can't control the grief. The grief is going to come when it wants to come. And it's not something I'm going to really get over. It's something I'm going to always carry with me. It's just going to be how I want to carry it. So I think I'm still very new in the journey. So I just made 5 months into the journey of grief and being a bereaved mother. And in my 5 months, what I realized is grief is a big wave. And some days I'm fine and some days I'm not. But therapy has been a good light at the end of this tunnel where she took me off of account of, I took a lot of blame and I had a lot of anger towards a lot of stuff after Messiah passed away. And I just feel like therapy cleared my conscience and cleared my heart and purified me a little bit about my choice that I had to make to give my son life, you know, because every time I said yes to a surgery, it was just because I wanted to give him more life. I didn't know it was going to get me here. I was hoping for a longer life. And I still have issues with that, saying yes to all the surgeries. Everybody's journey is so different. And I know a lot of moms that's grieving right now, and all of our journeys are different and we all do things differently. Like I love talking about my son, while some moms don't like talking about their sons, their kids who passed away. I have to watch his videos and look at his pictures daily, you know, and even like I have his memorial page where I share his story because some people just know people just think he was sick and he was so much more than a sick kid. And the sick part of him is people should hear more of the story. So I'm still figuring out the grief. I just know that I'm never going to really get over it. I know it's something I'm going to carry with me and drag it with me wherever I go. It's just how you want to present it. And I also tried like grief support counseling, like the groups with people. And it's a hit or miss for me because I can't really I don't feel like I relate to moms who's had adult kids pass away. And I don't really relate to people who didn't have sick kids. So when I go to those kind of groups, I don't feel like a connection. So I just do my counseling. I do a lot of online stuff with other grieving moms, and there's no magic tool to grief. When you're going through grief, it's something you're going through, and you're lucky if you have people who really understand that you're really going through something. And I think all you really can hope for is people who understand that you're going through something, and you're going to be different because you are different. You lost a kid. You know, this is not a breakup or divorce. You lost a person that you intended to watch grow up. So you're going to be a lot different. I call this part of my life right now is the afterlife because I died the same day he died, and I got to find how to live. So I'm still trying to find how to live. What I've done is if people invite me places, I say yes first. Even when I don't want to go, I say yes because being social and being out there, it forces you to find some kind of happiness in something. And I say, yes, I go. And if I want to come back, I come back. You know, just because you go somewhere, you don't have to stay there for the whole event. And I think saying yes to a lot of things also made me find my smile again. Because like I said, grief is a wave. And sometimes you can really be genuinely happy about where you are at this place, at this dinner party or at this party with your friends or wherever you are. You can be genuinely happy in that moment, even though you're devastatingly heartbroken about your kid. And it took me a long time to decipher the two of those, that you can do both. It's okay for me to be happy, even though I miss my son.
I love that you say yes. Oh, that's such a great. And everything that you said about grief, I think that no matter you're 5 months in, you know, somebody listening maybe 7 years in, somebody maybe 35 years in, it still lives with us. And I love what you said about being, it's all about how you deal with it. But what I really, really love is that you say yes to stuff, even though because you want to be able to find that joy and that smile. And I love that. I love the way you articulated that in so many ways, because I think that a lot of us go through these waves of grief, especially as, springtime comes and you get different holidays, and then you go through, Christmas season, the holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas holidays, and we ride those waves through the holiday season. And then, you get an anniversary that comes back around, and we don't always say yes to certain things around those particular times because we want to be more inward versus trying to find that joy in some of the things that we're doing with family and friends. So I really love that. So what you did mention a grief support group. Are there any other tool and therapy, any other tools or resources or books or things that has helped you in these last 5 months that you can share with the audience?
I think it's been mostly music, a lot of music. It's been my therapy, and it's also been me journaling, just journaling my feelings, accepting my feelings. If I'm having a bad day, accepting the bad day for what it is, allowing myself to go through the bad day, but also not being so hard on myself if the bad day becomes 2 bad days. You got to kind of be realistic with yourself. I'm grateful that I've only had days of single days at a time. And I think also my friend, I have a really good friend who lets me pour into her and she pours into me. And I think you really need support on this grief journey. And I think support is what you need. And the issue with grief is there's no manual to it, and people don't really know how to deal with you after you go through this. You become the difficult person to deal with. And I think when you get support and people understand that you're not difficult, you just have a different journey and you just have a different way of feeling, and you might have a good moment with this person and you might not have a good moment. I think you just need a really good support team and therapy. I think, a lot of times everybody's afraid of therapy, like therapy is a bad thing, and it can't hurt you. And I tell people that now, therapy can't hurt you. The most you could do is not like it. It's not like it's going to push you back into a corner or make you go further deeper into your grief. You're already in grief. Therapy is essential sometimes to get you to a common ground of understanding where you are, I think. And lots of music. So I do a lot of fake singing, songs that I sung to my son, and watching his videos and just remembering how happy I made him brings me joy.
So what encouraging words can you give the bereaved moms that are out there as they go through this grief and healing journey?
I would say if you're sinking, feel the sinkingness, but also find your float to get afloat again. Whatever you use to get you afloat, you need to find it when you're sinking, because sometimes if you sink too deep, then you're going to be drowning in something for too long. Don't be so emotional about everything people say to you, because sometimes people don't know what to say to you. So give people a pass sometimes, because grief is so tough that people say things without really thinking about what they're saying and not realize what it means to you when they say it. And they don't mean any harm by it. They're trying to say something really nice to you, and it didn't sound nice when you heard it. So be easy on people. And I would say yes. Go out, do stuff, live life, because your kid will want this from you. There's more life. Even though your kid is not living life, there's more life for you to live. And the more life you live is the longer you get to carry your kid through this life with you. Because that's kind of the only way we have now to bring our kids with us, is we have to live a longer life. So we just keep talking about our kids. Like, I'm going to be talking about Messiah forever. So he could be here 20, 30 years from now. I guess you got to kind of just live life. Still, as hard as it is, you got to push yourself. Try at least. Like I said, I'm very early in my journey, so I just
no, and I think that I applaud you for wanting to share your story and get Messiah's story out there very early in your journey. I still think that everything that you said today has even encouraged me, and I know it's going to encourage the women that are listening as they go through their journeys, no matter which stage they're in. I think that like I said, I just applaud you for being so willing and so open to share. So where can we find you on social media if we want to stay in contact with you after this episode?
I am on Instagram as Messiah's Mama 0430, and that's Messiah MESSIAH, Mama MOMMA. And he has a memorial page as well, and it's Messiah CHD Warrior _ Angel. I think that's it.
I'll make sure I link all the links in our show notes. So those individuals who want to follow you and just learn a little bit more or see pictures of Messiah as well, that they can go there and support you on his memorial page. But thank you so much, Chappy, for sharing your story and sharing your light. And no matter where people are who are listening on their grief journey, it doesn't matter if you're 5 months, 5 years, 15 years, we all go through this cycle of grief. And just listening to Chappy's story today should encourage you to do everything that she encouraged you all to do. You know, go to therapy, definitely say yes, and find your joy no matter where you are. So once again, thank you again, Chappy, for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, guys. I hope you guys find me on one of the pages.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I pray that this show was inspirational and a blessing to you. For show notes, visit ericamcafee.com/podcast. Please join us in our offline discussions in our private Facebook group by going to sistersinloss.com. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please rate and subscribe to us and leave us a 5-star review. I pray that you all have a blessed week. Keep the faith, and I'll talk to you next Wednesday.